Kia ora everybody, welcome back to Kōrero with Creators. Now today, we're going to be talking to Carlos Ha, who works on behalf of Sans Carving Studio. Sans Carving Studio is one of the many carving studios that specialize in making Maori adornments, weapons, things of that nature. Carlos took over the content creation for Sans Carving Studio, and so like myself, has been answering carving-based questions, particularly surrounding pounamu or greenstone. So today we're going to go over some of those questions for you all. But firstly, brother, introduce yourself.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Carlos Ha hau, no mōkai hau, and I come from a small town called Tokoroa, live in Kirikiriroa now, and like Tu said, about 2 years ago, I started talking with Sans, and then ended up contracting to them in two different ways. One was through social media, and two was just through business consultation stuff. Because in my other mahi, I'm self-employed and have a couple of businesses that I run and own. And so for me, working with Sans was kind of like a gateway into back into reconnecting with my tupuna in a sense, because a lot of Maori, in my experience, and mainly around our parents' age, got disenfranchised from their marae, and it happened for whatever reasons. Some deliberate, some just through living life and dealing with day to day. Separated. So for me, I was really excited to get on board with Sans, because not only was I interested in reconnecting with my tupuna and my culture, but I'm a bit of a history nerd as well. So the two for me were match made in heaven almost,
Yeah. Amazing. And so this is always the first question I ask all these guests, and it's either the hardest or the easiest question. But what does being Maori mean to you?
Yeah, this is going to be a hard one. Just because I guess if you had asked me that question as a young teen or a young male, so late, late teen to young, early 20s, I would have probably said self-deprecating words. I would have said things like "pori," "poor." I genuinely would have said those things. Yeah. And as I kind of think about that, and I think about why I did that. I guess it's quite an interesting thing, because growing up poor in a low socioeconomic town where 78% of our population are Maori Pacific Islander, as a kid, you just make these subconscious assumptions, right? And so on the playground, I've got this memory on the playground and at school, and I remember I looked around and it was all us Maori boys on the playground with no lunch and no shoes.
Right.
As a kid, you don't make the deliberate connection, but subconsciously you just make this connection that, mate, why is this?
Right.
And so as you go through life, those perceptions become your reality, and then your reality turns into confirmation bias, and you start looking for things that justify that opinion. So fast forward to being a teenager, I didn't want anything to do with being Maori. I turned my back to kapaka. I didn't want to bar it. I never wore taonga, ironically. Wore taonga. I saw it as being real Maori, and real Maori subconsciously was this negative thing to me.
Right.
So yeah, that if you had asked me then, I would have said that self-deprecating things in a joking way. You ask me now, and I guess being Maori is hard to answer, but probably one of the most interesting and best things about me, I believe, because on this educational journey I've put myself through, and this change in belief that I've had, I'm now doing the reverse, where now I'm doing a confirmation bias on why being Maori is such an amazing thing. Right. So every day I find reasons to love being Maori, and just to go back to that point on how I kind of turned my back on the culture because I had this subconscious belief that I didn't even know I had. Right. That even affected me right down to my taumoko. So I was 30 when I got my first taumoko, 29, and I actually got my first moko from someone you interviewed just recently, Te Haunui.
Yes.
I searched the internet for a long time to find someone's mahi that I really wanted. really wanted to express myself through, and Te Haunui was the one that I just, as soon as I saw the mail, I was like, that's it. But it's quite interesting how all these things kind of connect and work together. But to answer your question, man, it's everything at once. It's an evolving thing. It's being Maori is the greatest thing that I think about me, and I love about being Maori is I get to pass it on to my kids, so that they can now be Maori and experience what that's going to be like in a Aotearoa of the future, you know?
Yeah, now that's cool. And you know what too, I think it's really cool to share the perspective of Māori, because I'm sure there are plenty out there who at one point in their life kind of wanted to be like, actually, you know, I don't want to be seen like this, or like you said, self-deprecating. And so far the guests that I've had have for the most part had only positive things to say, you know, but I think it's an important perspective to share, because there are a lot of Māori out there who feel this way, you know, and there's a whole myriad of reasons for anyone listening why that might be the case, you know, and that's a whole conversation on its own. But I think it's just an important perspective to be shared.
And like I said, you know, like it's not a deliberate thing that you do.
That's right.
It's just slowly these things happen over time, and you make these irrational connections that are totally reasonable to make, but they're just irrational when you look back at them. But for the time and for that moment, you think, oh man, like I can see how someone got to that point. And that's definitely where I was. And I make no excuses about it. And, you know, I'm not ashamed. Like, I'm ashamed that I was so against my culture for so long.
Right.
But now I've just gone the complete opposite way. And, you know, everything I think about from a daily perspective, it's not reading these books, to taonga, to making taonga, to talking Māori content. Like, I love it. And it's just, you know, for me, it's, you know, so I had an interview with Paraone recently, and I was asking him about his experiences as a Māori, and Paraone Gloin, that is, and he was, you know, he spoke a beautiful kōrero about tupuna intervention, and I'm not a particularly spiritual person at all, but he spoke about tupuna intervention, and your tupuna will find a way to communicate with you through something. Some people it's moko, some people it's art, other people it's pounamu and carving, and it was really interesting to me because, you know, I think the same thing, like, I'm being reconnected to my tupuna somehow. I don't know how or why, but this connection of that you get when you're in this mahi toi space is just something that I just love. So
yeah. No, that's cool. And for anyone listening into, Paraone Gloin is also one of the hosts of another really great Māori podcast, Taringa Podcast. You need to check it out. It's super informative. It's got some great variation on things Māori. Now, so for clarity as well, obviously I'm interviewing Carlos here on behalf of sort of Sands Carving Studio, but Carlos is not Alex Sands, who is the master carver of Sands Carving Studio, but I'm predominantly chose to interview Carlos because this is still a series about content creation, and Carlos has been the one that has sort of driven the at least recent content surrounding Sands Carving as a brand. So what has been your relationship with social media, you know, yourself?
Yeah, for me, it's another tricky question to answer, because I guess the wider question is like, what's my relationship with marketing too?
Right.
So, you know, I started a marketing agency, and I hate using that word, but I started this, you know, marketing business about a year and a half ago to solely promote my own mahi that I was doing. And then I kind of figured out real early on, because again, people in my whānau, sorry, we'll get to that part. My wife is worked for a digital marketing agency as well. And what I kind of realized is marketing was a really interesting space because, one, it's forever changing. You know, what works today did not work 5 years ago.
Right.
I mean, just look at TikTok versus Facebook and Instagram, right? Two, with decent industry knowledge and I think just real good taste and knowing what people want, you can put together a really good marketing campaign or send a good message. So my relationship with social media has been an interesting one because I like to kind of go against trends, and I like to kind of go against industry standards.
Right.
Mark Cuban said in an interview I watched was, you know, everyone's so quick to share how to make money and all these business gurus, but the real secrets people aren't telling you, because those people are going and doing those things, right? And so with marketing, I think it's similar. Like, yes, there's industry standards and there's stuff that you can do and there's stuff that is good to do, But the real secret, the real stuff, people aren't sharing willy-nilly, because if everyone was doing it, then it wouldn't be successful, right? So I kind of think the same with marketing. I went to the team, and how I got involved with the team was, I started a charity working with at-risk youth a couple of years ago. And what I wanted to do with these at-risk youth was connect them to their tupuna. Like, I had found success in it, so I wanted to do the same for these boys. So I rang, just cold called Sands, and I said, hey, look, I've got 12, 13-year-old boys who are flirting with doing some naughty things and flirting with the law. And I said, can I bring them in and just show them what their tupuna used to do, and maybe one of these things will stick. We also took them to my FM in Auckland. We also did all these cool things, and the idea was, well, one of these things is going to stick with these boys. So took them to Sands, and that's where I met my current kaiako, Malcolm Cox, and I just said, look, here's these boys, let's run this activity, let's do some carving. So we did that, and then I begged him afterwards, hey, can you please take me on as a student?
Right.
Which he was a little bit reluctant, but once I explained to him, like, I'm serious, I'll drive out to your workshop and you can teach me how to carve every Wednesday, I'll do it. And that was kind of my foot in the door to Sands, because Malcolm was a carver at Sands. Right. And then basically from there, I started talking with the team and Alex and seeing what they were doing on social media. And I just said, look, not to sound arrogant, I think I can do a better job at telling a story, because that's all marketing is. And to go back to Brown there, like, he is a master communicator, he's a master orator. But Maori were master orators because we had to be, because we had to recite mo te our whakapapa. It was essential to how we lived our life. We needed to know our whakapapa, so that when we were fishing a lake or a awa, and someone contested our right to do that, if we could recite our whakapapa, boom, we were allowed to be there. It was like our deed. So whakapapa and communication to Māori, at least, is one of our greatest skills. And so I see marketing as just an extension of that. It's just an extension of communication, it's an extension of storytelling. If you're a great orator, you're a great storyteller, you are going to be a great marketer. That's my personal belief. And so I said to Sands, look, you guys have got possibly some of the most beautiful mahi I've seen, at least locally. And that's not to discredit anyone else's mahi, but just what I've seen. And I said, there's a better story to be told here. And that's just how I approached it. And they, let me take over. And my whole kaupapa has just been about sharing stories. So you'll notice we haven't actually spoken really about our product at all. Right. Because that's not what our strategy or our goal is. Our goal is actually to talk about the things that surround, the things, the pillars that support our taonga, as opposed to the taonga. And pretty much instantly we had a great reaction to it, because it's more the kōrero, the story, the bigger picture stuff, as opposed to here's a beautiful ring, here's a beautiful, and they are beautiful, but so I mean, that's been my long-winded answer around my relationship with social media. It's just an extension of storytelling, but I do have some industry knowledge. I do have a wife who worked in an agency. I mean, I've got my own agency, so I've got some experience in it. But I think the other half to marketing is you just got to be interested in the stuff you're marketing. You just, what good is someone who's done a random 3-year uni degree, who comes from the North Shore, has got zero experience doing Maori, we just happen to work for an agency? What good are they, respectfully, talking about taonga when they know almost nothing about it? So I think the other half to that is just being interested in the thing you're talking about and marketing, because then you're going to use words, buzzwords, cultural references that people like you are going to respond positively to.
Yeah, and I think that's important and quite cool to hear about as well, because so far the people I've talked to are either not insignificant, but I mean creators who have relatively low numbers and they create it out of passion, out of fun. Then I've interviewed a few creators who, like myself, they do it as a individual trying to make money, and then making money through things like brand deals and all that sort of stuff that we see from the content creation world. But today, you're the sort of first one that I've interviewed that's like you say, it's marketing for a brand. Like the Sands Carving Studio is a company, it is a business that sells products, right? They sell our taonga, like the one that I'm wearing right now, which I was actually gifted by the bro here. But And we're in this new era now though, where people are like, they get sick of all the ads, right? Like people are getting sick of ads. They're getting sick of seeing that 30-second ad before a YouTube video and it's fun. And then they go, no, click this, click that. And so like what I think is quite interesting about the Sands Carving socials, which is what you've done, is you've changed it into a way now where people come and they either watch those really well produced interview Kōrero talks, or they're watching the more casual question and answer stuff that you've done. And indirectly, right, they're being fed Sands Carving Studio, you know, like, so there's nothing in what you do that is saying, here, buy this cool necklace that we've just made. It's like you're just filming it in the studio with all the taonga there, and people go, oh man, that's pretty cool. Oh, this is the studio, boom, go check it out, buy, you know. And
that's right.
So it's quite interesting to see.
And that's quite deliberate. And, you know, so part of the strategy around that is definitely don't sell to people. I know it's counterintuitive to everything you're taught in sales school is sell, sell. But the part of it is like, we are actually trying to, I guess, formulate our own ideal customer. And the ideal customer for us isn't someone who just wants a new shiniest thing. It's actually someone who loves the taonga. You know, I'll be sitting at the studio one day and I'll go in there for a half an hour hui, but I won't walk out till 4 hours later, because people will just come in. And the people that are coming in are people who give a damn about history. You know, I had a guy walk in just with the jaw of a whale. I'm just sitting there having a call, and he walked in with a whale jaw, and we have an hour-long conversation about it, because we talk about where it comes from, we talk about the history of Parawa, we talk about the pieces he wants to turn it into. And so those are the customers that we are really trying to manifest, because those are the ones that are going to come in, we're going to talk with, we're going to have this lasting relationship with, and that's really what we're about. We sat down as a management team and we just said, what are our goals? And our goal was like, part of it is we've got to keep the lights on for the business, but the big part of it is let's just get people interested in taonga and educated around taonga, because educated people make better decisions, right? They make smarter decisions, and they are likely to be return customers. And again, that's a very small part of the strategy. The strategy is just sharing this content. And, you know, just through the content itself, it led me to you, right? Like, this is what's important for the brand, is we have people like you that we can kōrero with, we can communicate with. We would rather koha something like that beautiful well-tooth necklace to you for a relationship sense than going and selling that, because we know we could sell that, but that doesn't mean anything to us. It's for us. It's let's build this community of people who just love the mahi, and we are getting there. And the other thing, just to your point around the socials, is we are inconsistent deliberately across all of our different platforms. Our long form content only goes on Facebook and YouTube. Our polished studio photos only go on Instagram. Our short Q&As go on TikTok, because I truly just believe use a platform for its purpose, right? And all of those platforms have a certain purpose. Sure, their capabilities to do things, but double down on what works, right? And for us, we know what works on which platform, and so that's what we push. So, you know, that's our strategy. Get people in the door and kōrero about Māori taonga, Māori history.
Yeah, and that's smart too, because you don't hear about that. And, you know, it's something that I'm aware of. I don't actively practice it all the time necessarily, because it takes so much more work, but literally specifically creating content for the specific platform that you're posting to, right? You know, like, photos do much better on Instagram, so put all the photos on Instagram. Although, you know, and like you said, the platform's always changing, so there's like variation in that. But like, you know, I make a video for TikTok, it just goes on Instagram and it just goes on Facebook, you know, like I just cross-post it to all of it. But you don't often hear about that specifically working the inner mechanics of a specific platform to its best, you know, to your best advantage. And so, you know, and
don't get me wrong, like there's no problem cross-posting content from a reach perspective, right? Like that's absolutely fine, and there's no rule book, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I've been anti-rule book my whole life. Believe me, if there's an establishment, if there's a bureaucracy, if there's a process, my first job is how do I challenge it, because I hate settling into the same old routine. But cross-posting, there's nothing wrong with it. And like I said, someone might watch this in 3 years' time and go, that guy is dead wrong now. But we know what works for us now, because we've been trying it, and we know the engagement, we know which lead to certain things. So it's working for us now. I have no doubt in my mind it's going to change in 6 months. But something you're actually doing really well, side note, is what I really like your approach when it comes to the marketing side is I talk a lot about particularly in my business, is around fringe customers and fringe interests, right? And so we do it a little bit. Well, it's actually been our whole strategy for TikTok, at least, is you talk about something that your audience might only slightly be interested in. For example, you started off with your music content, which evolved into Te Ao Maori, and now I'm seeing you post a little bit more about videos and video reviews, right? And that's a smart thing to do, because people who are interested in video content may not be interested whatsoever in Maori or music, but you're a person who specializes in those two things, and you're touching on these fringe customers. Hey, some of those are going to filter over naturally because they're interested in what you're talking about in this movie space. So we do the same. We talk about history.
Yes.
Because people interested in history, it's not hard to convince those guys to get interested in taonga, because they're related.
Yes.
And then they become customers. So for you, you're doing the strategy. I don't know if you're doing it deliberately or not, but you're doing a good thing by expanding your content to get fringe customers. And you see it happening all the time on TikTok. People who are big TikTok stars on this platform are now becoming cooks and chefs and sharing food content, right? So it's a smart way to go. And I just wanted to say, I thought you're doing a great job with that stuff.
Yeah, no, cool. And you're right. It is somewhat on purpose, because, like, you know, I'm just discovering this now, sort of coming up on 3 years of content creation. But as someone who, you know, I only know so much, and I'm only so young, there's only so much I can teach, you know. So, like, I'm starting now to filter in other types of content for my viewers, because one day, which will probably, I mean, by the time this video is out, it probably won't be too far away, you know, towards next year, I'm going to basically slow down on the Maori stuff, right? You know, like, I've taught as much as I can possibly teach. This current series is my last reach to, like, allow those who have more knowledge than I to share their bit using my platform, you know. And then I'm going to slow right down and just start moving back into the stuff, the more casual stuff, which could involve a whole range of things, you know. But we know that socials are built around those niches, you know. So once upon a time it was like, oh, yeah, it was Maori this and only Maori this. And then when you go, I love movies, I'm going to make a review about a Maori movie. Right, so you get movie people who are interested, but then it's still in content with the Maori stuff. Like, obviously we're musicians. Luckily our music's in Maori, so I can make music content and it still relates back to that core niche while broadening the potential audience, and also sort of buttering up the audience for eventually when I go, all right, this is kind of the end of what I can teach, you know, and I'm going to slow right down on the content that you're used to seeing, and you can either stick around and hopefully by that point they just enjoy watching me for me, and then the content itself doesn't necessarily matter so much. And I'm already seeing that pattern right now, you know, like, people obviously who've been following me for years now, they would have heard all this stuff that I've had to say, you know. And so now people are, like, starting to get more interested in stuff like, oh, what outfits did you wear last week too, you know? So, like, that's just the natural progression of when you build an audience that like you for you, you know. They start following you because of what you're putting out, Maori content, for example. They go, oh, this is interesting stuff. Okay, I've learned it. Why do I still want to follow you? Oh, I think you're an interesting guy. And then you can kind of progress from there. So yeah, it's definitely on purpose to an extent, you know. It's also just because I'm passionate, and it's kind of drip feeding the audience, because eventually I'm just gonna have to be like, look, this is about as much as I got, you know, until I have other stuff to say. And then when I got something to teach people in the space of Māori again, then I'll do it, you know. But it's like, you can't just keep, I don't want to be repeating it, repeating, you know.
It's such a competitive space too. So, you know, you see so many brands out there. And again, I'm not sitting here on a pedestal going, I know better than you and your brand sucks. Like, you see so many brands out there who just do, you can tell they're trying, you know, you can tell. And so when I said before, what I think good marketing is it's industry knowledge with just good taste. It's kind of like fashion, or it's kind of like, I guess, we'll cut this part, but it's kind of like fashion. It's like some people just have better fashion than others, right? Some people are just better at building things than others. Some people just have better ideas for marketing than others. And so if you're someone who doesn't particularly have great ideas, but you've got all the industry knowledge in the world because you've been to seminar X, Y, and Z, and your uncle owns an agency and your uncle does this, right? But you just don't have that idea, no amount of industry knowledge is going to convince you that this is a bad movie, because you did everything right. You ticked every box, but your market, why is my video not doing well, or why are my sales not up, right? I think real good marketing comes from industry knowledge, absolutely, but also just good taste. And some people just have better taste than others. Someone has much better ideas than me, and someone has much better ideas than that guy. And those people tend to do well. And they tend to do well for a short period of time because taste is really important. And I think the reason that, like you said, your followers are following you is because you dance between those two things. And good marketers do that. They dance between industry knowledge and good taste. And that's what whenever I tell people with their marketing, I'm just like, yep, sure, follow industry knowledge and sell solutions and give blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, if you just haven't got good taste, people just aren't going to pick that up and run with it. And, there's a little bit of controversy in there as well. Like, believe me when I say videos that we post, particularly if it's around history, we get some kickback. And I love a good kōrero, but you just can't argue online because you lose so much nuance. You know what the guy's actually saying. Google is the myth debunker's best friend. Confirmation bias exists. So I love a good argument, but man, some of the social media comments are a bit of a laugh to watch sometimes.
yeah. And I think too, like, it's one of those hard truths that I think a lot of people who make content online, I get lots of questions all the time. How do you do it? What's the tricks? What's the secrets? And I see, and of course, because like you said, people out there trying to sell stuff a lot of the time, they'd want to sell that trick through a course or something. But and I think it's Stanley from the Attention Seekers squad. He made a good video recently, which I was, funnily enough, going to make a video of the same nature because I keep seeing it. But it's like, sometimes your content's just bad. There's no, TikTok's not hating you. They're not blacklisting you or whatever these funny words, that shadow banning, these terminologies that we see. Sometimes it's literally, and people need to just like sort of admit that maybe your content just ain't that interesting. I post stuff all the time that I know will not get views. I still do it because I'm like, well, one, it's filler content. Like, I do make, when I post every single day, as someone who posts every day, not everything's going to be a viral video, right? Well, unless you really want to work hard, but like, for the most part, I'm casual and filling out space. So I'll post something like, with these moko artists, I know that not all of it's interesting for people, but I still clip it and I still post it because it's a Wednesday. I'm like, this can just go out on a Wednesday, and I'll save something good for the weekend or whatever. But like,
and if you're front of mind for people, they'll keep engaging with you if they see that you're active and you're posting. I started a podcast page, or a basketball page. It was just me and my mate to do it strictly as a hobby. I had no intentions of it because me and a school friend, we argued a lot about basketball. So I started. We got a lot of followers pretty quickly. Got up to like 13K, and then I just stopped posting. I was too busy. And the follower count just plummeted. It just went straight back down because people don't want to stay following people who aren't active. So I can see why you do that. It completely makes sense.
Yeah. You just keep fueling the machine, because it's better than nothing. If I just stop posting everything, then people are going to go, oh, he doesn't post anymore. All right, moving on. Where I'm like, I'm not interested in this, but he's still there. Maybe he'll post something interesting tomorrow. So I'm like, I just keep it churning. But some people, I think, need to just be self-aware enough that it's like, maybe it's just straight up bad, because I'll post a video and I know when it's going to do well. And these days I've gotten to know my audience. TikTok's a little bit more turbulent with its algorithm right now, but like Instagram, I know when I post on Instagram whether it's going to be plus 50,000 views or not. I'm like, I just know. And most of the time these little interview clips, they're pretty low because they're just filling out. And then I know though that, like, for the moko artists, for example, people are less interested in the things like, how did you get started doing moko? What's this and that? But then when I post the one at the end of the week that says, is moko only for Maori? Everyone's like, they're listening in. So like, I know which ones are going to do well, but you just need that.
If they're provocative and look, I've seen the same. I've done video on video, and this is one thing I'm finding that I actually quite love about Te Ao Māori in the space is with people post these videos and expect there to be, everyone to agree on the same point. But in Te Ao Māori, there is so much that just Māori don't agree on as a people. Even our dialects and our language, from how we say some words up north to down south.
Yes.
Who first discovered Aotearoa? I did a video on who discovered Aotearoa, and I purposely tried to make that video as least specific as possible. I just said,
Right.
I'm going to leave as ambiguous as I can because it depends who you ask. And I gave like 5 different
right.
beliefs on who it was, and I still got come from the comments. And it didn't bother me. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. But it's funny that people will live and die on the hill that they have made up in their mind. Because if you look at history, there's a book called Why Don't We Learn from History? And there's one great quote in there that I love. And it basically, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but it talks about how a lot of history wouldn't exist without invention and imagination. And he basically says that, we fill a lot of the blanks in as people through history. We can't know everything. So what we do as individuals is we use every single reference point we've got, and we paint a picture in our head of what history is to us, because we don't know any better. And there is so much of that goes on when it comes to Te Ao Māori space, because you've got people who say, well, the only ones who know the history of our country are from the marae. So go and talk to your kuia and your karawa, right? And then you've got people who say, well, I've got a master's in this, and this is what all the literature says, and this is what I believe. And then you've got people who live in the middle and go, well, my nan said this, but I know that this book exists, and then this guy on TikTok told me that, so I don't quite know what to believe. But those 3 people there all have a different view of the same history.
Right.
And it's so difficult to get anyone to agree on anything.
Yeah.
And I quite enjoy it because it's fantastic for the conversations that come out.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot from the comments myself, because someone will say something and then I'll go and find a book about it and I'll read it. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'll learn a whole new thing. But in this whole history journey of mine is just the most sobering thing is there's such a fraction of what actually happened. Like there's just so much I don't know, and there's so much we don't know.
Yes.
As people, they're like, sometimes I'll share some content and I'll just think that is such a small, minute part of the entirety of what I wanted to talk about. Like talking about the moa, for example.
Right.
Those videos are pretty good, but they sparked a lot of conversation and a lot of debate. And again, you've got people who don't know any better, so they fill in the blanks and just say, well, this is what happened to the moa, or even the Moriori. That was another big series that just went crazy because the misconception of what happened there. But people have filled in blanks based on their own prior knowledge, and you can't tell them otherwise. And it truly does make for exciting content and great conversation.
Yeah, it does.
You never get to the bottom of anything because there's people to argue with.
Yeah, and it's one of the sort of, depending on how you look at it, I think for me it's one of the redeeming qualities sometimes of social media, is because like it does open up this ability to have conversations, whether they're conversations that are going to be considered fruitful or worth your time, but it opens up the ability for these conversations with people that you would most likely never ever talk to in real life, and so you get to hear both the takes from those who are not willing to change their mind, but like you said, learn so much as well. There's so much that I've learned just by sharing what I know online, and someone else who knows their story goes, oh, actually I've heard this, or maybe this, or have you checked out this book, or so-and-so said that, and it's like, whoa, blows my mind. Like I remember when I was doing something about the ink that we would have used once upon a time for moko, and I said, oh, I think like the little caterpillar thing that we burnt up and this and that, and then someone was like, oh, out here we use dog poo, It's like, what? What do you mean? That's crazy. And then more people were like, oh, yeah, we did this with the dog poo and we fed the dogs and this and that. And I was like, what? And I had to Google it and everything, and like try find some written on it. And it's like, never would have known, never would have known if that was based off of what I had. So I always think that's pretty cool. Now, on the topic of answering all these questions online, so you answer many of these questions that you've just been talking about, and probably some of these questions that I'm about to ask you have already answered. But of course, I'm also being asked these questions, which is actually how our relationship started in the first place, wasn't it? I said, actually, I don't really know much about pounamu and things like that. Maybe you should go check these fellas out. But for those, I posted a little Q&A on my story, just to double check what anyone may be curious about. So I thought we'd go over some of those frequently asked questions. Now, just to sort of start it off nice and clear, for anyone who's listening that doesn't know what pounamu is, what is it?
Okay, pounamu. So pounamu is a type of stone specific to New Zealand that Maori really prized and treasured. Now, to kind of keep it as simple as possible, and believe me, I am not tōna whakairo. I am barely a kai whakairo. I've carved for 2 years. I've created some, I can create some small pieces.
Yep.
But I am speaking on behalf of what I know, just being around this world for 2 years. So there's people out there far better educated, far smarter than me on it. But I'm going to answer what I understand it from my current perspective. But pounamu to Māori, and when we say pounamu, we really mean 2 types of stones, nephrite and bowenite. Not really relevant if you just want surface level understanding, but pounamu is a type of jade specific to New Zealand, and I'm only using that word jade because it's easy for people to make that connection, right? But it's a precious stone only found in Aotearoa that Māori really, really treasured and valued to this day. Actually, it was very treasured. It went down a little bit post colonization, and only recently has it kind of come back up. That won't be true for all Māori, but from a cultural perspective, pounamu definitely lost a bit of its sheen throughout our history. Right. But that's what it is, a precious stone that we use and use for tools and jewelry.
Yeah, sweet. Now, and you've mentioned it right there, jade. This is where I think one of the biggest confusions comes in. Is there a difference between pounamu and jade? Even though you've kind of just answered it, but
again, if I'm going to answer to keep it simple, they're basically the same thing, but because jade's found all over the world, right? It's found in China, it's found in Australia, it's found in Thailand, I believe. It's jade's found everywhere. But when we think pounamu, yes, it's a type of jade. But we call it pounamu as Maori, and we had one all-encapsulating term for the precious green stone here, and it was pounamu. But it's the same, for the sake of simple surface level understanding. It's the same thing. It's all jade except bowenite. It's different. It's all jade, but I guess the differentiating factor is we're talking about New Zealand jade, which is what we call pounamu.
Right. And what has been, from a historical perspective, I suppose, Ed is someone who is a self-made historian. What has been the significance of pounamu to Māori, like, throughout history? And like you said, it was used for tools at one point, then weapons, and nowadays it's more about adornments and that. Talk about that a little bit.
So the history is pretty interesting. From what I understand, the first instance of finding pounamu was done by Kupe when he visited Aotearoa the first time, and he was said to have found this greenstone, made toki potangata out of it, or toki out of it, adds tokis, and took them back to the island and said, this is what I found. And that story, it goes further, and I'm got to brush up on that, but I believe one of them come back and become the toki that one of the tribes have. I think Rotorua Museum might have it. They'll check me on that. But that was its first kind of origin in Aotearoa. Now, there is a myth, there is like a, I want to use the mythological, but a spiritual kōrero around it to Māori about how it was created. And, there's talk of taniwha and sandstone. I won't go there.
That's a long story.
It's a long story. But basically, for Māori, it was a precious stone that was hard, that was... In the early days, we fashioned bowenite more because it was the softer of the stuff. So tangiwai. So when I say bowenite, I mean tangiwai. And tangiwai is a type of pounamu. It's real translucent, but it's also softer to work. So it's easier to work and form into shape. So a lot of the real early pounamu taonga artifacts you see today, you can tell it's early. One of the first things I look for is to tell if it's early is if it's tangiwai or not. Because if it's tangiwai, then there's it's a good chance it was early because it was a softer stone. We really ramped up our pounamu harvesting capabilities when Pākehā arrived with steel tools. But tangiwai was kind of the first softer stone where we could work a lot easier. And then over time, what we did is we realized this was a commodity, it was a special thing, and we started trading it and we started using it for tools. So it had many purposes, probably too many to talk about. But pounamu was treated and traded as a very valuable commodity. So either as slabs of pounamu or little preforms that you could then go and turn into toki. But the main purpose of pounamu back in the day was adze heads, because it was really hard. And and everyone thinks pounamu heitiki, right? Heitiki were created after a toki was worked down. So you created this long, super hard adze head. You would work it down, and if you had a toki po tangata, it was used either for the first or the last chip on a bit of a wood, either of a waka or a whare, and it was more symbolic. But there were adzes, and I've got a couple behind me that are pounamu that were either used for carving or just mainly carving, actually. They were used mainly for carving. You wouldn't use one in a garden, for example, but you would use one to carve. And because of how hard it was to get, they were valued. And, just to tie this into moko, if you were a good moko artist and you were invited to a village, sometimes you'd be paid in pounamu. So you'd be given a pounamu, and there's a Maori saying, and I forget the Maori translation for it, but in English it basically says, pay the man what he's worth if he's carving your face. So if you get a real good moko, you're expected to pay the guy who did it really handsomely. And if you're not happy with your moko, or it's not as great as you like, maybe you won't pay him as much. But now we come back to the kōrero of honor and utu, and are you insulting the person? But in terms of pounamu itself, it had so many uses, some practical, some ceremonial. Now if we talk about it today, we don't use pounamu unless you're one of these hand carvers that exist, and they're phenomenal. We don't use pounamu to carve today. It's all in whakaaro rākau, at least it's wood. It's wood and chisels, and then in the studio with stone, it's all power tools and grinders and stuff. But today it's definitely just a jewelry piece, more symbolic around what it is and what it represents, as opposed to its functional use.
Yeah, awesome. And I think too, a lot of people a lot of tourists, they come here and they see pounamu, and it's a New Zealand thing. But just real quickly, for anyone who might not know, sort of talk about its geographical quirk. It only comes from one side of the country.
Only comes from the South Island, and there's a iwi down there in Ngaitahu, and they basically are the guardians of pounamu. And there is actually specific types of pounamu that no one else is allowed to have except for iwi down south. That's snowflake. But on the whole, they are the guardians of pounamu, and it's in their interest is to protect pounamu and make sure that it's ethically harvested, or you're doing it through the right channels. Now, there was an act that was put together, I believe, in the 70s or the 90s. I have to double check that. And it was basically that said, this is a line. Anything gathered before this point, if it was gathered legally, is fine. But the government really cracked down on the harvesting of pounamu, because you used to have people try and really raid the rivers for it, because they knew Maori were buying this stuff. So there is some pounamu that was obtained down south through means that maybe weren't right. But at the moment, you can only get it down south, pounamu, and specific hours that you can go up. Arahura is one. And what's really cool at the moment is there are people down there, guides, so you can go and see, and they'll take you for walks up the Arahura River. And anything you find, and this is my understanding, is anything you find that you can carry, you can take out with you. If you find it on the beach, if you find it in certain places, you need permission to harvest it. So all of this pounamu that we get, it obviously either comes from collections that have been good, been pono, or we obtain it through the right means.
And do you happen to know why it's only found in the South Island versus the North Island, considering we're so close?
It's got to do with the mountain ranges down there. So I guess if you kind of think of it like, I guess diamonds, you know, you're only going to find them when the conditions are right. And so in the mountains down south, whatever happened under the surface is what's created it there. So you'll only ever find them within kind of like fissures, right, of the Earth's crust. So if you think of the mountains down there, and there's actually a mountain range that splits, and you can see, so some of it's found in the mountain and some it's down in the river, and it's because over time the two mountains have moved, but we haven't found it anywhere north because we don't have that that long range of mountains like they do down south.
Oh yeah, cool. Now, obviously, another thing that comes with pounamu is this kind of spiritual connotation. And I know you mentioned, you know, you yourself not overly spiritual. I'm kind of the same. But do you have anything to sort of share for people who are curious about the spirituality?
Yeah, for sure. Because, you know, we get a lot of questions, around tikanga and the spirituality of pounamu. And so much so that it really determines if someone even wants to own a pounamu. They get real scared around, oh, what's right? What can I do? Is it tapu? Is it not? Do I have to get this blessed? Do I not? There's all of these questions that come that, again, if we go back to people just fill in the blanks, right? They don't know, so fill in the blanks. And so from the spiritual side of pounamu is believed to, some people to believe that it has its own wairua, it has its own soul. And again, like if I talk about the story of the taniwha who turned his wife into, who turned a wife he stole into pounamu. If you believe that kōrero, because there are people who believe that kōrero, and so then, hey, it does have a wairua. And then you know, water itself is believed to have wairua. So, and pounamu, you always find pounamu in water, and pounamu is said to have water components. So people do believe that pounamu has its own wairua, it's its own kind of being, and so people do take that very seriously, and that's kei te pai. You know, we and that's why when we work with this stuff, we really try our best to work in a way that it's right. Now, now we start dancing on a topic that is really tricky to answer, because if we start talking about tapu and noa now, and what our tupuna used to do when they used to carve, and what we do today when we carve, and what our whare that we carve in is like today versus what it was back in the day. You know, there were a lot of tapu around carving and toinga whakairo back in the day, that would make a calming environment so tapu. You couldn't have food around. There were certain rules you couldn't do. Wahine couldn't be around, and so taonga to our older people still has the hangover of that belief that this taonga is so tapu, right? And what we try and navigate today is, well, how do we make taonga that is still in line with tikanga, but we're not creating it in the way that our tupuna used to, and from a tapu perspective, because that's a big argument. People come in and say, well, do I need to get this blessed? And it's that's entirely up to you and your tikanga and your hapu. But the spiritual side is huge, because the next thing is, when you wear a taonga over time, your body is absorbed by the taonga. And you can actually see that with bone. Bone changes color. Very old bone changes color over time. It's been worn a lot. It goes really dark. And that's just body oil being released into the stone or the bone. And heitiki in particular, those believe, in my mind at least, they're the top of, if we talk about what things have the most spirituality. I believe a heitiki is right up there, because generally a heitiki is used to represent someone or something, whether it be a tupuna or whether it be a whānau member. And pre-European, when I say back in the day, I'm talking pre-European days and post a little bit. When someone would pass away and their heitiki was with them, it would sit on their body for about a year. And then when the bones are being finished off and moved into a cave, that heitiki would be then passed on. So that wairua of that person lives within that heitiki. And if you can imagine that happening for hundreds of years, you've now got the spiritual taonga that has the wairua of all your ancestors that's been passed on and on and on. And so those heitiki exist, and those are the heitiki that I'm fascinated by. But then there was another point in our history where we made heitiki, because Māori are smart business people, we made heitiki for the sole purpose of trading to Pākehā who wanted it from the ships, right? So two heitiki kind of existed at the same time. There was this heitiki that had this rich history of tikanga and people and ancestors, and then you had these taongas that were created and sold for the purpose of selling to Europeans. And so these two things existed today at the same time. And so what we try and do today is we try and make taonga that is almost starting the journey of the taonga that's going to be a whānau gift.
Right.
We love selling taonga to Māori whānau who come to us and say, this is going to be for my son and my son's son. That's the part we absolutely love. So
how would you say that for your guys' studio, at least, you sell predominantly to Māori, predominantly to non-Māori, or sort of a mix of both?
I'd say a majority of our customers are Māori, definitely. But we have huge buyers overseas. A lot of Europeans are interested in Māori taonga. And mainly we're talking art dealers or people who are interested in history and they have their own private collections. But majority of our customers are Māori, and we want to make it accessible for all people, but Māori having Māori taonga that's created in Māori, because there's something I guess I want to touch on is there's a thing called tourist taonga out there.
Yes.
And taonga, and you just have to go to a few shops to see it.
Yep.
And it's taonga that is done in a Māori style, but after being around taonga a little bit, you can look at something and be like, that's not carved right. That whakare does not look right. The proportions off. Those shapes are a little soft. And I call them tourist taonga. And I'm not going to say where, but I've been to a few places where I've walked in and been shocked at just the level of quality of mahi, and not in a good way. Some places have on their wall, this isn't even New Zealand greenstone. Right. We've got this greenstone somewhere else. Other places have stuff on the wall that you're just like, that is not Māori. That is so we make sure we are as authentic to the source material as possible. So it's why we have artifacts like these in and around the studio, because we don't want to stray too far from what our tupuna were using and making. Like, don't get me wrong, we have a contemporary side as well.
Yes. But
if we're going to make Māori taonga for Māori whānau, it needs to be Māori. It can't be an attempt at Māori. It can't be anything but Māori resources. It's like, it has to be pounamu. And that's the one thing that we love sharing is like, look, if you're going to get it from us, you've got people who have really studied what our tupuna used to wear, and what our tupuna used to do.
And I might as well ask this now while we're on the topic, because it is a very common question, because people are aware that the tourist traps exist all over the world, so people are aware of this when they come here, particularly now that the education is becoming more widely known, like you got people like yourself who are teaching people more about these things that maybe once upon a time would have just poured into the local tourist shop on Queen Street and called it a day. But how can somebody actually go about knowing that what they're buying regarding pounamu or taonga is actually authentic? And what would you consider to be within the umbrella of authentic?
That is an interesting question. Look, there's many good carvers out there, Pākehā and Māori. I guess it comes down to what you as a consumer are comfortable owning. So some people just want a piece of something from New Zealand. I've been to New Zealand, I got that from there, right? But if you're going to spend serious money on a taonga, like if you're going to spend a few $1,000s or a few $100s on a taonga, you definitely want to make sure that it's authentic. I guess the first thing you want to do is ask the person you're buying from where the stone or the bone is from. And that's your first kind of hurdle. If you know where it's from and they say New Zealand, you're already off to a great start, right? Anything under that's made in New Zealand and from New Zealand, you'd be okay with. It's just to what extent you want to go. Do you want it Māori carved? Do you want it? Do you not mind who carved it as long as it looks the same? Do you want it carved in a certain style? Do you want it as close to a heiteki as possible, or do you want it contemporary? So all of the, I guess the questions I would ask is, where's the stone from? Who carved it? Maori or non-Maori, if that's important to you, and have an idea of what you're buying. Because I've been into many tourist shops, believe me, and you have just some old person behind the counter saying, "This is what Maori believe." Let's just talk about, for example, pikorua, which is like a little
twist
8 infinity symbol. That's not a traditional Maori shape.
Right.
That's just something that people like because it looks nice, right? But our tupuna weren't carving pikoruas left, right, center. So that's when you'd kind of ask, what do you want? Do you want something created in a Maori style that looks really great, or do you want something authentically Maori? Only things I own from an artifact perspective are really early Maori tonga, because I like Maori influence, right? Anything post-European, steel tools. You don't know if it was carved for tourist purposes to sell to people on the boats, or you don't know if it was an actual old piece. So I like really old, but some people, like I said, just want a piece. But making sure you've got stone from Aotearoa is key. Making sure it's carved, if you want Maori carved, make sure it's carved by Maori is key. Making sure it's as close to the source material as possible, because some carvings, particularly whakare, you just can't tell, because there was a really interesting thing that happened during the carving, I guess, throughout Maori, was carvers would be invited across the motu, right? It's easy for people to get into this trap of thinking that a certain style belonged to a certain people, which is true. It did, for the most part. There were some styles, like Te Atiawa have a very distinct style. But carvers were invited all over the motu to carve and teach and learn. And so we become this really mixed style of carvers that you see. Some places definitely have their own, but for a lot of us, it's really hard to tell. If I was to pick up a taiaha, so one of these taiaha here that I own, I bought it from overseas actually and returned it home. And no matter what I do, I will not be able to find where it's from.
Right.
Because I've looked, because there's only, if you could probably count there'd be less than 20 different styles of taiaha.
Right.
Heads, right? There's not that many different styles. There 20, I'd say max, but we have so much more Maori across the country, across time. There's nowhere to peg where that's come from.
Right.
So style is important. So again, if you're looking for tonga, ask, hey, what style is this carved in? If they can't answer and they say, oh, just give your generic answer, then go somewhere else. Right. But for us, authenticity is literally the cornerstone of what we stand on for our carvings. It's got to be right. And I can talk a little bit about heiteki, and I'm probably going to do a video on it. But heiteki are very interesting to tell, because the Germans for a few years really exploited heitekis and sold a crap load of them to Europe as Maori heitekis, and they did a terrible job at it. And there's certain things you can look for, like where the grooves are. Is it a circle bored hole? Is it a countersunk hole? All of these things you look for that our tupuna used to do, that the Germans just took shortcuts and kind of just cut corners to get things out. So there's a lot of things to look for. Too many.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And so this next one then, hand in hand as well, but this is probably the pounamu question of all time. You've answered it. I've answered it. I know this. Can you buy your own pounamu, or must it be gifted?
This is the one question that I probably got the most hate on. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to say this is the one question I probably got the most, sparked the most debate.
Right.
And I can understand it, right? The number one, so my answer to that question is yes. There is a little preface in there, but the answer to that question is yes. And the reason this sparked so much conversation was because people thought I was just trying to plug, plug the business. Yeah, go and buy it. It's fine. And, some of the criticism was, well, of course you guys are going to say it's in your best interest.
Right.
And my answer to that is, don't really care if you buy it or not. It's your tikanga, it's your whānau. You've got to be okay with owning it, and if you feel good owning it, right? Fine, it's on you. But you definitely can. And the reason I say that is because our tupuna were doing the same thing.
Right.
They were exchanging services for pounamu. Moko artists were mokoing people chiefs for kahukiwi, for pigs, for potatoes, for pounamu. We were trading our services for pounamu. If we had money, I can promise you we would have bought pounamu too.
That's right.
Because not only was it a functional tool, but it was important. It was important to us. So by saying that you can't buy your own pounamu is almost like implying our tupuna wouldn't have done that had they given the opportunity to buy it with money. The truth is they were trading for it.
Yes.
For themselves.
Yes.
They were buying it for themselves. Now, where I think this kind of evolved into what some people would call tikanga, because now we're getting tikanga versus kawa versus hapu to hapu to hapu, right? Like,
right.
Ooh, is it okay for me to buy that? Well, talk to your whānau. If your whānau say it's fine, then it's fine.
Right.
If your other whānau says it's not, then you just decide what you're okay answering. But for me, I definitely think you can buy your own pounamu. Our tupuna were doing it. If you're buying it for show, then you're buying it for the wrong reason. Doesn't mean you can't do it. But if you're buying it as a family taonga to gift to your children, who's going to gift to their children, absolutely. Myself, I don't own a hei tiki yet. And the reason I don't own one yet is because I want to carve my own.
Right.
But I'm going to do that essentially for myself to pass on to my children anyway.
Right.
So I just think there's a little bit of this belief that, hey, I'm going to keep this tikanga, but I'm going to drop this tikanga, and people pick and choose what tikanga is relevant for them and their whānau. Kei te pai, that's good on you. But there are many people who come into the workshop and buy taonga for themselves. And we're talking tikanga experts. We're talking people who, very important people on their marae, very important people in their hapu are buying taonga for themselves. Right. But also, for me, I believe if it's a barrier preventing you from connecting to your tupuna, then you've really got to think about that. Like, if buying a hei tiki or taonga for yourself connects you and makes you feel more Maori and makes you feel happy to be Maori, then why deny yourself that right or that ability because of some tikanga that you don't even know if it is true. You haven't even spoken to your whānau yet.
Right. And you know, too, I think there's that gray area when the sort of currency that we associate with currency today gets introduced. People attach a different association with it than they do the act of transferring goods or trading goods or services, you know, like, because it's like a lot of moko artists get a lot of flack for requesting money instead of things like the koha, you know, and it's like, but where's the difference? You know, money is still as financial or beneficial to somebody's gain as taonga, and that can be in a time gone by. And I think that the association we have with money is something that has affected that world of pounamu too, where it's like, oh dear, but you know, money's not our thing, so how it must be bad if you buy it for yourself and all this and that, you know.
And just touching on that moko thing, like, it's a dangerous game to play, that one, because if people are getting a little bit iffy about paying moko artists a fee and not a koha, then essentially, if you don't pay them enough of a koha, then you're telling them their work isn't worth that much.
That's right.
So, like, so this is what I mean. There's almost some hypocrisy in it, in this tikanga kōrero that I see, is because it's like you use tikanga when it suits you, but then you overlook it over here when it doesn't suit you. And I think that's, for me, the biggest thing. It's like, kei te pai, if you want to live your world through your lens, because I mean that's all we do anyway. But you shouldn't tell someone else how they need to live their experience and what they need to do. And so for me, it's like, if you want to buy it, buy it. You don't want to buy it, don't buy it. But there's nothing that I see from a tikanga, because now we talk about the other thing, which is tapu, right? Because the thing that follows on from can I buy it is if, and I have this conversation all the time, well, if I buy it for myself, is it not tapu then? Right. Well, again, this comes down to, what do you believe around this and what this tapu is? If your whānau believe that, fine. But from my perspective, it's not tapu because it was never tapu to start, because we didn't carve it in tapu conditions. Right. So it's always been it's always been fine. It's just what you have applied your prior knowledge to a situation and taken it as fact. That's all that people are doing. Because, you know, then we get to blessing taonga, and it's like, well, do you have to bless your taonga? And it's like, well, again, who are you talking to? Who are you talking about? If I go to one uncle, he might bless it to Papatuanuku Tane Mauta.
Right.
And then I go to another uncle who might be Christian. You'll bless it to Jesus and God, right? And it's like, well, which one do I align with better? And do I even want it blessed? Because possibly I don't sit in either of those camps. Maybe I just want to give thanks to the carvers. So just my blessing might be just a thank you to the carvers. So, but people associate, I think, blessing with tapu, good and bad, evil and good. And so if I don't bless it, oh, this is cursed now. Well, no, it's not. How can it be? So all of these things exist. And again, I can't sit here and say that you're wrong for believing. I'm just sitting here saying you believe what you want to believe. But I'll tell you, educate yourself around, ask questions, if you feel a certain way, ask the kuia on your marae. Hey, why do we believe this? Why do we think this? And then hash it out that way instead of, making these wild assumptions.
Yeah, awesome. Now you touched on before the pikorua rather being a new sort of creation, and this brings up the next question, which there are so many different shapes that you can find pounamu in, that it gets carved into, and normally when you walk into the shops, they'll all have a little something sort of describing what they mean. These main shapes. This could be a very long question, so maybe as quick as you can answer it, or short. What do some of these main shapes represent? Which ones would you put into this category of traditional? Just the list I've got here: things like koru, toki, obviously, pikorua, hei tiki, hei mātou, all that sort of thing. As quick as you can, what do they sort of mean? What do they represent? Why would somebody buy those shapes if the meaning is and the symbolism is something they're looking for?
Right. Very long question. What I'll do is I'll separate into what I believe are kind of pre-European pieces, which are traditional, and then you've got these other ones that are kind of now Maori are creative, right? Some there's artifacts. So I've been to the archives in Auckland and looked at some of the taonga, and there's taonga down there that I haven't even seen before from a shape perspective. Like, how really? Like, I've seen a lizard, for example, like a carved lizard. That's not common, but it's still old. So Maori were creative. Let's get that straight. They were creative with some of their pieces. However, on the whole, there's about 5 or 6 shapes that Maori traditionally use. Now, remember, carving pounamu without tools was bloody hard, and it took forever. And it was laborious as heck. So you weren't going to spend a lot of time making too many shapes. They were all functional shapes. A toki, so the toki shape, that was used primarily as a tool to carve. When it got too short, and it was about yay big, and you couldn't bind it to a stick, it got turned into a hei tiki, because you weren't just going to throw that away. So you've got koru, number 1, hei tiki, number 2. But oimata is another shape that is fairly common, and that's just a rounded kind of teardrop-looking shape. Sometimes they're longer and thinner and look almost like I guess the closest thing I can think of right this second is like a nail file shape. But oimata kind of sometimes doubled as kuru, as earrings, because depending on the length. And they were done mainly to show status. Chiefs would wear kuru in their ear, but roimata also worn around the neck, and kōrero around babies, using them to chew on. That I see as a double purpose. I don't think they were created simply as a chewing toy. I think they were created more as a taonga. But then you've got pika pika. Then you've got hei mātou, which is the fish hooks. All of those things have different meanings. Now, I can't get up here and tell you exactly what they are, because it's so vast and varied, and a lot of it's open to interpretation. So for me, and if I go back to toki could represent the start of a new life, because a toki starts as an ad and it moves on to become a hei tiki. So toki could be used to represent new beginnings, right? In one sense. Or it could also be used to represent someone who's a hard worker, because tokis are like a tool for working hard. So it's not so much there's one definitive, this is what it is, much the same in tāmoko, actually. It's more just about your application of what you want it to be represented through. Now, there are some things like a hei tiki that you could stretch your imagination about what they represent. But for the most part, they're not one definitive answer. I can't give you one definitive, this is what it was, because it's so open to interpretation, and the wearer and the gifter as well. they had purposes. Now, anything past European, we got a little bit more intricate with our designs.
Right.
And that's when you can start to see more detail on our whakare and stuff. But the most part, you've covered them. Hei tiki, toki, roimata, hei mātou. Those would be the traditional.
Yep.
And, you know, some of the moons and the shields that we start seeing are more contemporary stuff. But they still did exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And is there a proper way to care for pounamu, you know, to maximize its longevity potentially?
I mean, you can every now and then re-oil it if you like. But for the most part, wear it. That's what I think. Wearing your pounamu, wear it often, because you want a pounamu that tells a bit of a kōrero. You want one that's worn. Old hei tiki, they were worn so much that often they have so there was a hole drilled at the top of the hei tiki, often that hole's broken, you see another drill hole. That's how much it's been worn, because we used to use muka to tie it up. Muka was quite abrasive compared to what we use today, and it would wear down. But I mean, you're still talking daily wearing, you're still talking a lot of wear and tear. So I think the best thing to do is wear your taonga. In terms of, you know, storage wise, just keep it somewhere nice and dry. But it doesn't really matter. It's a rock. It's a hard rock at the end of the day. We've got taonga that have survived hundreds of years. Only thing that can really hurt a taonga is dropping it and breaking it.
Right. And then that goes into the next question, because that probably goes hand in hand sometimes with the spiritual side of it. Is there any proper protocol regarding a broken pounamu? You know, when it breaks, do you have to throw it?
That is interesting, because this is probably one of the train of thoughts that has quite a decisive yes and no. So some people believe that by breaking your taonga, it's a sign, and that you were never meant to have that piece of taonga in the first place.
Right.
That's what some people believe. Some people believe, actually, that's fine. This taonga is stubborn and arrogant, and it wants to be two separate pieces. So it's just kind of you know, you kind of pick what side of the fence you want to live on, again, based on the tikanga of you and your whānau. I had this question probably a couple of days ago now, and they said, you know, my son had this patu, it's broken. What do I do? And I said, well, that's up to you and your whānau to decide. Talk to your whānau. But and I guess my answer lies in what I'm just about to say is, we recarve plenty of broken taonga. We either glue them back together, or we just take the two pieces and we recarve them into two different shapes and we move them on. People need to understand, pounamu breaks all the time when we're carving. All the time. I'll be carving a piece and there'll be a crack right there that I haven't seen. Bam, it snaps, and now I've got two pieces of taonga. What do I do? I turn the bearings, That happens way more often than people think. We cut taonga, for goodness sake. We cut it through the middle. Right. It's similar to snapping it, you know. So it comes down to you and your whānau. My personal opinion is absolutely, if it breaks, carve it into something else. If you want, return it to the awa, because that's pounamu always wants to return to the awa. If you're worried about it, go put it in a river somewhere. You know what's going to happen? Someone's going to pick it up one day and go, great, look what I found. I'm going to carve it into something else. So you can, but those who don't believe it, gates by.
Yeah, mean. Now, pounamu is the material that, you know, we've been talking about for most of these questions, and it's the material that most people are probably familiar with when it comes to at least Maori jewelry and weapons, you know. But there are many more, and we've talked about some of them already, you know, like obviously the taonga that you guys give me is a whale's tooth. What are some of the other materials that Sans Carving Studio likes to work with?
Yeah, so number one, most popular by far is pounamu. Number two is whalebone. We use whalebone a lot. It's a little bit harder to get a hold of whalebone, and similar to pounamu, you have to acquire it through either a iwi or a hapu or someone who's got it the right way. But whalebone is a very popular item of ours, and it makes sense, because in a Te Ao Māori sense, whales hold a very special place to Māori. You know, some view whale as kaitiaki, on the same level as Tāne Mahuta, because it's Kōrero, and there's a story there about Tāne Mahuta and the whale's relationship. Some also treat whales like kaitiaki because obviously that they were the ones who guided Kupe to New Zealand. Right. So whales have this really important relationship with Māori. So their bones are treated as precious as pounamu is. And so we use whalebone a lot. And like I said, we'll be at the studio one day and someone will just walk in and say, here's some whalebone. My granddad had it, and I'd love it to be turned into X, Y, Z. We've done that a couple of times actually, and it's actually how our relationship with Lockie started. He reached out and said, "Hey, I've got Lockie from Aotearoa History." He reached out and said, "Hey, I've got my granddad was a tohunga whakairo. He's got this whalebone. Can you do something with it?" So we get a lot of whalebone through that. Another material we use is kapia Cody gum. Not as much, but we do carve it into some things. And kapia was, something that's it was always used as jewelry because of its color, but we use it specifically for jewelry. Back in the day, it was used as fire starter, sometimes chewing gum, but today we use it specifically for jewelry. But outside of that, we'll often use onewa, which is basalt, which is the black. Those patu there are usually made from onewa. And we'll sometimes carve pounamu out of that. And there's a lot of onewa over Raglan ways, and the best onewa was found in Coromandel. But outside of those, we sometimes touch in rako, but not often. Sometimes we'll do some rako, but not often. It's mainly pounamu, whalebone, and we dabble a bit in onewa. And then that's about it.
And then the very odd moa bone too, right?
And then the very odd moa bone. I mean, one great thing about the carver Alex is not only is he so good at what he does. Interesting little thing about tohunga whakairo and master. So you said the word master carver earlier, which from my perspective, from a skill perspective, Alex is for sure one of the best carvers I know. However, to be a tohunga whakairo, you kind of need to be given that by your community. Right. There's no degree you can get. You can do a degree for sure. You can definitely go and study, and many tohunga whakairo who go on to tohunga whakairo become master carvers. Right. But it's something that you have to be bestowed upon you. And I think to do that, you need to work on a whare nui, work on a marae, and you need to have this body of work with your community. So interesting enough, I made the mistake of calling him a tohunga whakairo one day, and he said, "I'm not a tohunga whakairo yet." And I said, I was shocked by that because he's so good at what he does. He's created he created that thing you're wearing right now. He said, "Hey, mata around your neck." He created all my rings for me. He's done some like the most incredible work. But from a tohunga whakairo's perspective, there's just that tikanga that exists around that, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, and while we're still on the topic of materials, because it's one thing every time I mention, a piece of jewelry that I'm wearing is whalebone, inevitably it comes with the concerns from the audience. So just for sort of clarification, you mentioned it a little bit there with Lockie and that, but could you elaborate on how you would acquire whalebone in 2024?
So gone are the days are we getting out on our 10-man waka and trying to throw a harpoon at a whale in the Cook Strait. That doesn't happen anymore. Whale, like I said, it's hard to come by, but it does exist. I mean, you often hear of whales beaching themselves quite often. What would happen in that situation is Doc would normally reach out to the local iwi and they'll say, "Hey, you've got X amount of hours to come and harvest as much of this bone or whatever bone you want." And because Maori, they typically want the jaw and the teeth. So whales are beaching themselves often, and Maori are getting their hands on whalebone often. That's one way. Another way is old collections. So some, you hear about it all the time. Some people are just walking down the beach and they'll find a bit of whalebone and they just pick it up and take it.
Yep.
That's happened before. But old collections are normally how we find whalebone, or people, honestly, most of the time people come to us with, "Hey, I've got this whalebone. Can you turn it into something for me?" And what I love about the kaupapa at Sands is we're not just about charging people money for a service. Like, we will often trade. We'll say, "Hey, look, well, let's do a trade. We will carve you this, we'll keep the rest of this bone," and we'll trade like that. If someone's financially strapped, we'll say, "Well, look, let's work out a way, because we want to get this taonga made for you, but let's work out a way." So we kind of try and dabble in the ways of our tupuna through trade, which I think is really cool. A lot of our whalebone definitely comes through trade. Whale teeth are quite easily accessible, actually. I've got one right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for your piece, well, you can often buy weld teeth on some of the auction sites, Dunbar and Sloan, Cordy's, Webb's. You can just go and buy weld teeth. The only thing is you can't buy it from overseas. You have to buy it locally, local whale bone. But you might have seen recently that some of it's been stolen in the news. So whale bone and taonga theft is on the rise, interestingly, which you kind of expect with the state of taonga being interested more by more people.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's just really just for clarification, you know, because people are like, "What, you guys hunt
we're not out here
whales?"
hunting whales.
Now, this is pretty much my last question, but you know, you touched on it very quickly at the beginning, but you know, people are probably pretty curious when you're talking about, you know, making a modern heitiki, a toki. What tools are you using to shape everything that you make? You know, how does that compare to the tools of our tupuna? And do you receive any kind of, you know, we see this in the space of moko that people try to belittle a modern moko artist because of the use of modern tools, you know, compared to using an uhi. Do you guys face the same sort of criticisms as a carving studio?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part. So the tools that we use are just, heavy grinders, saws, drop saws, and Dremel and drill bits to get the fine. Absolutely. There are people who exist in New Zealand, and I commend them for their patience, who still do it the traditional way. One name I can think of, and there's many more, one name I can think of is a guy called Leighton Robertson. If you check out his Instagram, I think it's just Leighton Robertson Kaifakairo. He doesn't know me, by the way, but I know his mahi. He creates heitiki and taonga and taiaha, the old school way, using stone, water, rope, and wood.
Right.
And it takes him a long time, you know, weeks to finish one piece, because he's sitting there grinding it back and forward. So traditionally, our tupuna would use those. Today, we use grinders and tools. And there's a lot of kind of positions you can take on it. You can say, well, look, if I do this traditional way, I'm going to charge per hour, and this time is going to be inaccessible from a financial point of view for you, because I'm just going to charge $50,000 for a heitiki, because this is how long it took, and this is why, right? So actually, modern tools helped us to make taonga a little bit more accessible.
Right.
That's one. And two, if people want that, they can find it. There are people out there who do this traditional way. And like I said, for me, that is just phenomenal work.
Yeah.
But then you have people like Alex who have absolutely mastered making it using the tools we've got. And let's not forget what our tupuna did. The minute steel was introduced, it changed our fishing, it changed our farming, it changed every part of our life, changed with the introduction to technology. So anyone who criticizes Maori for adapting technology in their mahi to kind of do their mahi better, I think is real short-sighted, because our tupuna did it the first second they could. They traded everything for it. So we don't really get it, to be honest, because I think, you know, we do everything else right. We try and do everything else right, that we don't get it too much. I'm sure there's buyers out there who don't even bother, but I think people just understand the state of actually how long it takes. And technology is not a bad thing. It's helped us create, like, you know, we've used jewelry, gold, silver with pounamu. We've only been able to do that with technology, right? And now we have beautiful pieces that are not only gold, but pounamu and gold. And we're finding a huge market for that because people want that.
Yeah, awesome.
Sorry, the second half of your question, what was it?
No, that was it. That was the one. So the one thing I also like to do at the end of these is sort of pass it forward. You know, Maori are a community, and we're about, you know, more than just ourselves, and that's kind of why I wanted to start this series. But so to allow other people to sort of have an idea, you know, who are some of your other favorite carvers? You know, obviously we got Alex, but if you were to,
some of my favorite carvers, I really like Leighton Robertson. He's one that jumps to mind for me personally, just because of the commitment and dedication to his mahi. I think he's so good. I think it's what he's doing is so good for the culture, because, you often have these questions yourself, like, oh, I wonder how they did this back in the day. Well, this guy knows. He'll show you how he did it when using sandstone and water. I mean, I'll skip across and jump to moko.
Yeah.
Really, again, I'm going to shout out to Honui again. I think his mahi is incredible. I love the stuff that he's doing in his space. From a history perspective, my school teacher, my kayako, Trevor Bentley, he's really the guy that kickstarted me into loving history. I was one of those kids in school who wasn't really into too much. I was into everything, but not anything really. And I enrolled in his history class because my friend did it one year. And ever since, I'd been hooked with history. He was the first man who kind of introduced me to New Zealand history. And the knowledge gap between someone who took history in New Zealand and didn't in high school is huge. I remember having conversations with friends at school talking about New Zealand history, and they looked at me like I was making stuff up. Like my own whānau, I would have conversations with, like, did you know this happened in our country? And they're like, no, it didn't. And it was mind-boggling to me how much I didn't know, how blind I was to this. So my high school teacher, Trevor Bentley, and he's just releasing a new book, actually. He kind of kickstarted this love for history. He's the one who kind of made me want to go on when I studied at university. It was because of him. And I knew my love of history was only confined to New Zealand because the minute I got a paper on because I did a history degree, the minute I changed, they made me start learning about European history. I dropped out. I said, no, I'm cross-critiquing over to teaching because I don't want to learn about kings and queens in Europe. I want to know everything there is to know about Maori. So that's how I knew I was only really hyper-focused on Maori history. And ever since, it's kind of exploded. And all I do, only books I read are either business books or Maori history books. And that's about it. So those three for me would be, I think, people who are doing great things. And believe me, there is hundreds more. I know there is. And I'm not here to, sorry if I've forgotten obvious names, but those three people for me are great, doing great things. Any historian, I know historians get a bad rap, because it's quite difficult to historically report on the state of Māori, but any historian who's written about Māori history, at least with the intent to get some truth out there, I think has done a great job. Michael King he's one of our greatest historians, and he often got criticized for some of the things he wrote about. Alison Best, so he's like the godfather of New Zealand history, in my opinion. And sure, some of the stuff he written was wrong, but without it, we'd be so lost. So any historian with whose true intent is to get a good historical account out there is good.
Yeah, perfect. All right, bro. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a sit down and have a kōrero today. I think this is going to be a really interesting episode for a lot of people because, again, it's one of those things a little bit like the moko stuff that there's just so many questions. There's so much gray area for a lot of people.
I probably didn't do the greatest job answering a lot of it, to be honest. But
no, bro. It's nice and quick given our time restrictions, like you said. And this was always the intention with this series is it's never to fully answer the question, right? It's about to hopefully maybe just shut down an initial misconception and then hopefully encourage people to go out there and search for that information properly themselves. Just to wrap us up, I normally like to end off with some form of advice, and because you sit in two spaces, I'm going to give you two and you can just answer them separately. But one, do you have any advice for anyone who wants to get into carving? And two, do you have any advice from a marketing perspective, as a marketing guy, for anyone on social media, any little tips without giving away the secrets?
If you want to get into carving, don't do what I did. Go to a school and learn carving through Te Puia or Te Wānanga. Go and do it through a channel. I was lucky enough that I found a kayako willing to teach me, and I was lucky enough that I could once a week not have to go to work and could drive out there. That's not a normal circumstance. So don't do what I did. Go and learn it from tōrunga whakairo. So you're surrounded by people. There's carving courses in stone you can do through the wā, and there's also carving courses in rākau. So if you really want to do it that way. And from a marketing perspective, I would say, from a marketing perspective, if you're a Māori business or you're a business who is struggling to get your message out there, I would say talk to someone talk to a marketer who's interested in the thing that you're trying to sell.
Right.
And I know it sounds like obvious advice, but if you're working with an agency, if you're working with a marketing team, put people who are interested in the thing you're talking about in charge of communicating the message out to people, right? Like, I'm interested in taonga and history, so I like to talk about it. So I know what things people like. I am my own target audience, so to speak. And so quite often people just say, oh, here's a big shiny marketing agency, or here's a big shiny marketing budget. But then they get Becky from the North Shore, who knows almost nothing about the industry, but she's got marketing knowledge, but that taste factor's not there. So it's just find people who are interested in the thing you're talking about to spread your message, and then keep it simple. Just don't sell your product. That's what I would. Don't sell your product. Sell everything but your product. Sell what your product does. Sell who your product's going to. Sell everything but your product is what we're doing at the moment, and that's working at the moment. I'm not always saying that's not always going to work, but it's working at the moment. It's just, oh, sorry, there's quite a beauty. And then sell to fringe customers. Do what Too's doing. Dabble in content that's within the realm of what you do, but might pull some of these people over a little bit. That's what we're also doing at the moment. That seems to be doing pretty good. So sorry, there's a couple in there, but yeah.
Yeah, perfect.